Welcome to the G5 Hive in our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Florida Atlantic Owls, who finished 4-8 last season. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 13th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is the FAU Athletics Beat Reporter. He is a contributing writer for Bleacher Brothers and FAU Owl Nest. He is the play-by-play announcer for the South Florida Collegiate Baseball League. He is Robbie Lastella. Robbie can be found at FAU_Owls_Nest on X. Welcome to the show, Robbie.
Guys, thank you for having me on. I love the introduction. I love the FAU B-roll going on with the fight song. I'm ready to go. I'm ready for football season right about now.
All right. Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about the guys up front along that defensive line. They lost their leader in sacks in Decarius Hawthorne to USF. Latrell Jean goes to Temple, and then Evan Anderson, he ran out of eligibility. Despite those losses, they have a good core of guys coming back. You got Chris Jones, Marlon Bradley, Jaden Wheeler, and Jacob Merrifield. How did that unit look in the spring? And who do you feel needs to step up the most in this room?
Yeah, they definitely Owls definitely did lose some production there, especially between Hawthorne and Jean. But they were able to go out there and bring in new talent. I mean, Wilkie Denaud coming over from Auburn and Mississippi State. He only played the spring at Mississippi State. But Eric Brantley coming over from Colorado. You mentioned Jaden Wheeler back. Prince Boyd and Bryce Langston, they'll be forces in the middle. So there is just a ton of talent coming in, to the point where, some of these guys may have to sit a little bit just because they're not going to be able to play every down. But that's another thing with this unit. I mean, we'll see packages where we'll have Jacob Merrifield coming out there to stop the run. We'll see packages where Wilkie Denaud is in there for pass pressure. In terms of stepping up, the loss of Evan Anderson is critical for the Owls. He was a huge, not only was a pass rushing threat, but he was a huge run stopping threat for the Owls. And so Jacob Merrifield is a guy that I want to see be able to put a whole season together, hopefully not dealing with any injuries, and be that force, stop teams from getting 4 or 5 yards on first down. Bring Merrifield out for first and second down, have him snuff the run, bring out Eric Brantley, Wilkie Denaud off the edge, possibly, and then you have a pass pro unit as well. So a ton of talent in that room as well. As a lot of the Owls have been very good, at least on paper, bringing in a depth, which was an issue for them last season. So with this D line unit, I like the ability to run multiple sets, have a run stopping unit, have a attack the quarterback unit, have a unit that's just out there to kind of in passing situations to kind of provide pressure, but can also drop back. So I personally like all the additions that they've made to kind of make up for those losses. Now I'm interested to see, though, there's a ton. You're bringing in guys from everywhere. You're bringing them in from LSU, Auburn, Colorado, and so these guys, I imagine they want to play, and there's only so many spots on that defensive line to go around. So, how it is with the tight end room, everyone's bought in. It doesn't matter who's playing. Want to see the defensive line get to a point where that's the same thing. May already be at that point, but, these guys are all new, so they're going to have to gel a little bit, at least for the majority. I mean, Jacob's back, Jaden Wheeler's back, Marlon Bradley's back, but with all the new talent coming in, I want to see them gel and be okay, saying, okay, yeah, this is Jacob's set. He's going to go snuff the run. And then Wilkie's coming on to go attack the quarterback. So just a little bit of an analysis there to try to see how these guys kind of all play together without getting too big, if that makes sense. Because these guys are all really talented, and they're going to have to try to fit into individual roles that may not be every down.
Moving over to the linebackers, they lose a pair of guys who played a lot of meaningful snaps for the Owls last season. They were mostly outside linebackers, or in today's game, we call them edges, and Courtney McBride and Morven Joseph. McBride is off to South Alabama. Joseph is off to Jacksonville State. But they do bring back their leading tackler. Had 82 tackles a year ago, Jackson Ambush, and their 33rd leading tackler, Desmond Tisdall. They also bring back Jared Jarrells. How did the linebacker groups look in the spring, and did anyone stand out for you?
Linebacker unit is safe and sound. That's probably the in my opinion, the most least question marks. You know, this unit's ready to go. The quarterbacks of the defense, Jackson Ambush, Jarrett Jarrells, Des Tisdall, and Eddie Williams. All four of them all could play, like, in my opinion, are all really leaders of this whole team, not just the defense. Obviously, they're the quarterbacks of the defense, but just a ton of leadership there and a ton of talent as well. I mean, we saw all the Jarrett Jarrells was a tackle machine alongside Jackson Ambush. Dez has that familiarity with Rock's scheme coming over from Auburn, and Eddie Williams has been here since the end of the Lane Kiffin era. So he's seen FAU in their glory days, winning bowl games, having packed out stadiums, the whole nine. So having Eddie back this season in his final year, fully healthy, which has been an issue for him over the past couple years, that's an underrated guy in this linebacker unit, just because he hasn't been 100% now, probably 2 years or so. So him being at 100% alongside Jarrells, alongside Jackson, and I really think this linebacker unit is really solid. You asked who stood out. Definitely Eddie. Especially, it's just his mindset to me. He's kind of the OG of this defense. He's been around forever. And so having him here as kind of an anchor for all the new additions, both in the safety unit and on the defensive line, is important. It's important to have that guy who's been around, who knows, all right, yeah, you know what? None of these guys here have seen FAU be at their best. I have, and I know it's capable to win in paradise for sure. And so I think Eddie is a guy that if has a big year, he could potentially get some pro looks later round type thing. So we'll see. We'll see how things shake out, obviously. But ton of talent in that linebacker room as well. I sound like a broken record. I'm sorry, but they've done a good job at, as I've said, bringing in depth and keeping depth, especially, you lose Wester at the linebacker position, but other than that, it's really all right, and they've been able to maintain the core of Jarrells and Ambush. So.
Well, let's go maybe to the opposite end of the spectrum there on the defensive side. The defensive backfield lost 11 guys to the portal or no longer have any eligibility. What should we expect from the defensive backfield here in 2024?
Defensive backs, yes. So that it's the same thing in the sense that they have depth, a ton of depth, but a lot of younger depth. CJ Hurd, Mike Wright, two really young prospects that could honestly potentially start this season. Probably not, though, just because there's so much depth still in that room. They bring in Phil Dunham from Indiana, who I think has a potential to be all AAC. He's a ball hawk out there. At the safety position, pair him up with Jaden Williams back there. That's a really strong safety unit. Another guy in that DB room, safety cornerback area, Chris Tooley. He could play. He could play safety. He could play slot. He could probably go right or left corner too. But bread and butter for Chris would probably be in the slot. And I think. He's a guy that the players from last year, Jerron Morris specifically, talked about. Chris Tooley's season is next up next season. And so we'll see. Obviously, maybe that's the players talking about their guy. Didn't do anything too spectacular in the spring game. Didn't do anything bad either. Just, DB position. You either have an interception, have 10 tackles, or you don't. But he was solid in his limited snaps. Didn't get blown by or anything out there. So I'm interested to see kind of more reps from him and see if he's making that jump that his teammates believed he could make into this season. But there's there's depth in that room. Fabian Scott, another guy who was here last year, could potentially play in that safety position. But there's just so many guys. CJ Hurd was probably the top defensive freshman that they were able to bring in this class, and I don't see a path for playing time for him this season unless there is an injury. Because probably if he were to play, it would have to be either in the nickel, out of position because he's a safety, or somebody would have to be injured for CJ to play. Because there's just so much. There's Day Hill at corner, Bugs Brown, a guy who they brought in from Maine. He's probably a shoe-in at corner as well. And then they bring in Wendell Philord, local guy from Kaiser University down here, and he's a safety, but probably the starting slot. He was just, I believe he was the starting slot for one. I want to say the red team in the spring game, and he looked good. So I personally think that in that DB room, it's the same thing as the wide receiver room. There's a ton of talent there. They brought in a ton of pieces this offseason, both transfer portal and they're the freshmen that they've been able to bring in, Mike Wright and CJ Hurd at that safety position, and Kyle Boylston as well. Really talented, and there's not necessarily a path to playing time right away for them. So that's I'm a huge fan of the depth that they have, because again, DB is a position, both CB and safety, that they deal with injuries. Antonio Smith was probably the guy who stood out the most during the spring game. I believe he had a pair of interceptions, and he's a guy that's been around for a couple of years now, I believe this is his third year with the squad, and so he's got a reason to be playing this year. And again, there's just so much talent that I don't necessarily know if standing out in the spring game like that is gonna get him a spot. He looked incredible for the Owls in that spring game, but you don't want to put too much stock into just that spring game. So, but there's just so much talent that they're going to be able to plug and play guys. All right, yeah, we think it's run. We're going to sub in so-and-so because he's going to be our run guy. It's still yet to be seen. It's kind of like the defensive line. They got to figure out individual packages, but again, that's going to be another benefit for this team, because they're not going to have to keep guys out there for 10 straight plays, 12 straight plays. They'll be able to sub, and they'll be able to bring in fresh legs that aren't just backups like these guys could, especially the freshmen. Once Kyle, once Mike, once CJ Hurd see the field, I'm gonna be hard pressed to imagine that they'll be able to limit their snaps. I mean, these guys are talented, and CJ Hurd was probably. And there's NIL rumors out there, but he was FAU was able to get him over conference rival ECU, and there's rumors out there that ECU was putting up big NIL money for him, and FAU was able to pull him in. So if they're trying to bring these guys in from conference opponents, I'm hard pressed to believe they would do it just to have them sit on the bench. So, ton of talent in that DB room, and it'll be interesting to see who wins the battles and kind of makes a name for themselves over the summer, because it's still a toss-up, honestly. The guys I mentioned, Day Hill, Phil Dunham, Bugs Brown, those guys possibly maybe shoe-ins, with Phil being like 99% starting safety for me. But other than that, it's really tough. There's a ton of talent, and we'll see who as the guy that Coach Rock calls on is like, yeah, you're my starting right, my starting left. We'll see.
All right. So if you have to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who are you going to bet on?
Ooh, it's tough. So I want to give it to one of the DBs, but I don't necessarily know off the top of my head. It's like wide receiver, and so I've said wide receiver. I picked two wide receivers. I'm gonna pick somebody who I know for a fact will play this season. Wilkie Denard, transfer from Mississippi State, Auburn, familiar with Coach Rock. Coach Rock recruited him out of high school to go to Auburn, spent last year's redshirt at Auburn, transferred to Mississippi State for the spring, didn't work out, and then now he's here in FAU. he is a massive human being. Just based off of my short time seeing him, he looks the part of somebody who's going to dominate the trenches for FAU, and he dominated the 561 high school level too for John Carroll High School. So he's familiar with the type of talent that plays down here. Although it's the high school level, there's a lot of guys that on FAU that played in the Tri-County area, and he's making a name for himself amongst his teammates, I believe. So, kind of playing off that a little bit, I think he's in for a big season, coming back into his hometown where he was a big high school athlete down here. Now, probably one, in my opinion, probably one of the top 3 D linemen on this squad. I think he's in for a big year if he can be one of those guys where he's not just a rotational package player. As if he's on the field for a majority of the snaps, I think Wilkie's in for a potential to be an all AAC type of player, along with Phil Dunham. If it's not Wilkie, it's Phil Dunham for me. Phil Dunham is another guy that I think has the potential to be a ball hawk and safety for the Owls.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
We'll fight for FAU!